Hey, what's up? Welcome back. We're talking about A Sand County Almanac again today. Remember last time when I recorded on the second to last day of the month, hoping to edit and release on the next day? Yeah, we're doing that again. I didn't learn my lesson at all. Before we get into the chapter for February, I do want to touch on some of the things that I said I wanted to talk to you about last time. One of those things was some earlier conservationists that were sort of contemporaries of Aldo Leopold or just before Aldo Leopold. Our class didn't focus as much on Henry David Thoreau as it did Gifford Pinchot and John Muir. Those are the two that were talked about a lot more. Gifford Pinchot was this more affluent Yale grad that went into like forestry and conservation through the lens of business, sort of. And John Muir was actually born in Scotland, came to the US, came up through industry, but then had a serious accident. He kind of went on walkabout and went towards the southeastern United States, just kind of like walking on foot, nearly died. Kind of came to the conclusion that like nature wasn't like made for humans, like it wasn't ours to just take and use. It was somehow separate from us. Their two views on conservation are pretty different. Gifford Pinchot is more interested in the wise use of resources. John Muir is sort of in the camp of preservation for either recreation or just the aesthetic beauty of things. Aldo Leopold definitely falls more on the John Muir side of things. Conservation as preservation, which I understand, and I think there is a place for maintaining spaces that are untouched and undeveloped, but also before settlers and colonialists came, there were societies of people that had really healthy relationships with the land, were very aware of their place within a system and the environment. So that view of preservation, it gets more into conservation of nature rather than the environment. Environments are about systems and about how things are interacting with one another, both places and living beings. To have the view that humanity is somehow separate from nature and so is not a part of the plan for conservation, that is separating humanity from nature. So it's no longer environment because we are part of the environment. Last time I told you that the preface to the large edition had some interesting of the time environmentalist issues mentioned in it, and I went ahead and looked into some of these things, and it is a little bit interesting to me how they decided to talk about these issues. Though these essays have been widely read and quoted, their basic tenets have been all but forgotten in the glare of great national publicity, extolling the virtues of natural beauty. Roadside beautification is a far cry from the harmony between man and land that Aldo Leopold knew and taught. The America that declares the preservation of natural beauty to be public policy is at the same time planning to build dams in two areas of great natural value. Bills are now before Congress to construct power dams in the Grand Canyon of Colorado that would essentially kill the living river and flood a large part of this unique natural heritage. There also has been under consideration for some years the construction of a dam for the development of hydroelectric power in Alaska at a location that would flood out a large portion of the breeding areas of the migratory waterfowl of the Pacific coast. The construction of Rampart Dam could, in a moment of time, eliminate most of the ducks, geese, and other birds that each year for eons have passed over Washington, Oregon, and California. When Aldo Leopold wrote Goose Music, this could scarcely be imagined. Now this possibility is upon us. The shame is that the Americans proposing, agreeing to, and carrying out this plan will defend their action on financial grounds, when economics should not be the deciding factor, especially as alternative and feasible sources of electric power can be found. This generation of Aldo Leopold's grandchildren is rebelling on college campuses, demonstrating and working for social causes, and fighting on foreign soil. This same youth is maturing at that moment of time which is pivotal in the struggle to preserve things wild and free, that Aldo Leopold understood so wisely and expressed so eloquently. Of all the causes that attract the attention of these young people, the plight of nature is one which may be truly a last call. Things wild and free are being destroyed by the impersonality of our attitude towards the land. What better way to fight the destruction of nature than to place in the hands of the young this powerful plea for a land ethic? Carolyn Cluxton Leopold, Luna B. Leopold. Washington, D.C., June 1966. So, a couple of different dams, some in the Grand Canyon, one in Alaska, Rampart Dam, that I looked up. I wanted to see what impact they had, and honestly, it's pretty interesting. We did actually discuss the building of dams in the conservation class, and I sort of had to remind myself of like how intricate of an issue this truly is. Water energy being a clean alternative or cleaner alternative to what was readily available at the time. I mean, coal and oil, very dirty sources of energy, especially coal, were sort of the norm, and water-powered electricity becoming viable at the time was pretty big. But the ramifications of damming a river is pretty significant. It causes flooding of an area up front, and then it can also dry out areas downstream. The Colorado River, which was talked about in this preface, is the most water-controlled river system in the world, at least at the time that I took the class. The environmental impacts of damming the Colorado River is extensive. The Colorado River Delta used to go all the way down into the Gulf of California, and now there's large swaths of just salt flats. Completely changed the landscape, completely changed the ecosystem of that area. Good news, there is actually some efforts to restore the Colorado River Delta. I found that out while researching. If I can find a complete article, I'll link to that. It's a big issue. The damming of a river is a huge undertaking, and it has lots of ramifications. A lot of the water, unfortunately, that is taken from these dams are used in cotton farming and golf courses. So, yeah, that's pretty bad. I don't think that's a very good use of water. That sucks. The other thing that they mentioned in the preface was Rampart Dam. And Rampart Dam in Alaska did not actually get constructed. The Rampart Dam was first proposed, I think, in 1959. It was never constructed. The project was canceled in 1967, the year after that preface was written, which is huge. That was an area of the country where tons of birds, like an astronomical amount in my mind. 1.5 million ducks, thousands of geese and cranes and other birds, 13,000 moose, as well as almost 4 million like fur trade animals. Yeah, that was a huge part of the environment that was threatened by this potential dam, which, on its face, if that was the only reason why this dam shouldn't be created, then it shouldn't have been created, in my opinion. They bared the lead a little bit, though, in the preface, I have to say. Not only would it have impacted waterfowl and other animals, it also impacted 9 villages of real human people. Native Alaskans opposed it vehemently at the time, and they were sort of ignored for a long time. Thankfully, it wasn't built. But yeah, it's just really disappointing that in a preface where they talk about the youth fighting for social causes and fighting for environmental rights and different things like that, they just completely nix any mention of how Native peoples would be impacted by some of these things as well. It's just another example of how these environmentalists just saw humanity so separated from nature that they almost didn't care about humanity at all. They've gone so far wanting to preserve and protect the land that they forgot that people live on the land. We are part of that environment, and it's really disappointing that we couldn't also advocate for human life while advocating for environmentalist causes. Which also gets back to what I talked about last time about how the line "the unspoiled American landscape" kind of creeped me out. This video, whatever corner. This video is a clip from a documentary about Hetch Hetchy, a valley in the Sierra Nevadas in Yosemite National Park. They were building a reservoir after a 1906 earthquake damaged the water system of San Francisco, and San Francisco needed a new water system. That documentary is all about the environmental impacts of damming that part of the river and flooding that valley. And again, it's disappointing that in that documentary they talked about the wilderness stepping off of the Mayflower and how there's this abundance of natural resources that people didn't care about until we started destroying it. And it's like, yo, there are people here already. Yeah, it's just extremely disappointing how conversations about conservation largely leave indigenous people out. Just out of the conversation entirely. Boo! Hi. I don't know why. The dangers of not scripting an episode is you forget some of the things we wanted to talk about. So I am going to, real quick, do some additional videos. That was actually a big discussion point in the conservation of the environment class that I took, was this discussion about hetch hetchy. On the Giverpin show side, the wise use of land in that scenario is damming the river, is using a natural resource, using the land wisely for our own gain. The John Muir side of conservation thinks that is wrong, that there should not be, the destruction of this valley. So that was a big point of contention, but neither side really centered or cared about Indigenous voices whatsoever. I think a good set of questions to ask yourself when talking about any environmentalist issue or new legislature or development plans or anything like that, is the land being used wisely, and for who? What is at stake? What is being sacrificed if these things are enacted? What is the potential cost beyond just economic of anything that is proposed, be it a pipeline or a housing structure or anything like that? That's it for the preface. We can get into the actual chapter now. For February, the essay is titled Good Oak. I have sort of a complicated relationship with this essay, if I am to be honest. Some of the really neat prose that Aldo Leopold uses in the first essay is back in this one, but there's a lot more historical fact and stuff like that. So it feels drier. It feels more educational, more academic, which is great. I mean, that's what this book is. It's a educational academic book. For like the facts part of it, it's pretty interesting. For the prose, for the most part, really enjoy it. There's also a lot of his personal bias that seeps in, and I can appreciate some of it. I understand where he's coming from for a lot of what he's talking about, but I feel like his disregard for people sort of shows through. In the preface, in some of the other essays, he talks about wanting to live in community with man and land, and the vibe I get from a lot of his writing is more of a disregard for fellow humanity. This is an issue that I have with a lot of his writing, unfortunately. February, Good Oak. There are two spiritual dangers in not owning a farm. One is the danger of supposing that breakfast comes from the grocery, and the other that heat comes from the furnace. To avoid the first danger, one should plant a garden, preferably where there is no grocer to confuse the issue. To avoid the second, he should lay a split of good oak on the andirons, preferably where there is no furnace, and let it warm his shins while a February blizzard tosses the trees outside. If one has cut, split, hauled, and piled his own good oak, and let his mind work the while, he will remember much about where the heat comes from, and with a wealth of detail denied to those who spend the weekend in town astride a radiator. The particular oak now aglow on my andirons grew on the bank of the old emigrant road where it climbs the sandhill. The stump, which I measured upon felling the tree, has a diameter of 30 inches. It shows 80 growth rings, hence the seedling from which it originated must have laid its first ring of wood in 1865, at the end of the Civil War. But I know from the history of present saplings that no oak grows above the reach of rabbits without a decade or more of getting girdled each winter, and resprouting during the following summer. Indeed, it is all too clear that every surviving oak is product either of rabbit negligence or of rabbit scarcity. Some day some patient botanist will draw a frequency curve of oak birth years, and show that the curve humps every 10 years, each hump originating with a low in the 10-year rabbit cycle. A fauna and flora, by this very process of perpetual battle within and among species, achieve collective immortality. It is likely, then, that a low in rabbits occurred in the middle 60s, when my oak began to lay on annual rings, but that the acorn that produced it fell during the preceding decade, when the covered wagons were still passing over my road, into the great Northwest. It may have been the wash and wear of the emigrant traffic that bared this road bank, and thus enabled this particular acorn to spread its first leaves to the sun. Only one acorn in 1,000 ever grew large enough to fight rabbits. The rest were drowned at birth in the prairie sea. It is a warming thought that this one wasn't, and thus lived to garner 80 years of June sun. It is this sunlight that is now being released, through the intervention of my axe and saw, to warm my shack and my spirit through 80 gusts of blizzard. And with each gust a wisp of smoke from my chimney bears witness, to whomsoever it may concern, that the sun did not shine in vain. My dog does not care where heat comes from, but he cares ardently that it come, and soon. Indeed, he considers my ability to make it come as something magical, for when I rise in the cold black pre-dawn and kneel shivering by the hearth making a fire, he pushes himself blandly between me and the kindling splits I have laid on the ashes, and I must touch a match to them by poking it in between his legs. Such faith, I suppose, is the kind that moves mountains. It was a bolt of lightning that put an end to wood-making by this particular oak. We were all awakened one night in July by a thunderous crash. We realized that the bolt must have hit nearby, but, since it had not hit us, we all went back to sleep. Man brings all things to test of himself, and that is notably true of lightning. Next morning, as we strolled over the sandhill rejoicing with the coneflowers and the prairie clovers over their fresh accession of rain, we came upon a great slab of bark, freshly torn from the trunk of the roadside oak. The trunk showed a long spiral scar of barkless sapwood, a foot wide and not yet yellowed by the sun. By the next day, the leaves had wilted, and we knew that the lightning had bequeathed us 3 cords of prospective fuel wood. We mourned the loss of the old tree, but knew that a dozen of his progeny, standing straight and stalwart on the sands, had already taken over its job of wood-making. We let the dead veteran season for a year in the sun it could no longer use, and then on a crisp winter's day, we laid a newly filed saw to its bastion base. Fragrant little chips of history spewed from the saw cut and accumulated on the snow before each kneeling sawer. We sensed that these 2 piles of sawdust were something more than wood. They were the integrated transect of a century, that our saw was biting its way, stroke by stroke, decade by decade, into the chronology of a lifetime, written in the concentric annual rings of good oak. So that's the concept for this essay. It's kind of a chronological view of time through the lens of what was happening in the area of this oak tree. I need to cut this part of the video down a little bit. It's like 16 minutes long as is. I'll probably highlight the parts of the chapter that I'm reading so that you can still follow along. It took only a dozen pulls of the saw to transect a few years of our ownership, during which we had learned to love and cherish this farm. Abruptly, we began to cut the years of our predecessor, the bootlegger, who hated this farm, skinned it of residual fertility, burned its farmhouse, threw it back into the lap of the county, with delinquent taxes to boot, and then disappeared among the landless anonymities of the Great Depression. Yet the oak had laid down good wood for him. His sawdust was as fragrant, as sound, and as pink as our own. An oak is no respecter of persons. The reign of the bootlegger ended sometime during the Dust Bowl droughts of 1936, 1934, 1933, and 1930. Oak smoke from his still and peat from burning marshlands must have clouded the sun in those years, and alphabetical conservation was abroad in the land, but the sawdust shows no change. Rest, cries the chief sawyer, and we pause for breath. Now our saw bites into the 1920s, the Babbittian decade when everything grew bigger and better in heedlessness and arrogance, until 1929 when stock markets crumpled. If the oak heard them fall, its wood gives no sign. Neither did it notice the demise of the state's last marten in 1925, nor the arrival of the first starling in 1923. In March 1922, the big sleet tore the neighboring elms limb from limb, but there was no sign of damage to our oak tree. What is a ton of ice, more or less, to a good oak? Now the saw bites into 1910 through 1920, the decade of the drainage stream, when steam shovels sucked dry the marshes of central Wisconsin to make farms, and made ash heaps instead. Our marsh escaped, not because of any caution or forbearance among engineers, but because the river floods in each April, and did so with a vengeance, perhaps a defensive vengeance, in the years 1913 through 16. The oak laid on wood just the same, even in 1915, when the Supreme Court abolished the state forests and Governor Philip pontificated that state forestry is not a good business proposition. It did not occur to the governor that there might be more than one definition of what is good, and even of what is business. It did not occur to him that while the courts were writing one definition of goodness in the law books, fires were writing quite another one on the face of the land. Perhaps, to be a governor, one must be free from doubt on such matters. While forestry receded during this decade, game conservation advanced. We cut 1908, a dry year when the forest burned fiercely and Wisconsin parted with its last cougar. We cut 1906, when the first state forester took office, and fires burned 17,000 acres in these sand counties. 1901, which brought the most intense drought of record, rainfall only 17 inches. 1900, a centennial year of hope, of prayer, and the usual annual ring of oak. Now our saw bites into 1890s, called gay by those whose eyes turn cityward rather than landward. We cut 1999, when the last passenger pigeon collided with a charge of shot near Babcock, 2 counties to the north. In 1890, the year of the Babcock milk tester, which enabled Governor Heald to boast, half a century later, that Wisconsin is America's dairyland. The motor licenses which now parade that boast were then not foreseen, even by Professor Babcock. It was likewise, in 1890, the largest pine rafts in history slipped down the Wisconsin River in full view of my oak, to build an empire of red barns for the cows of the prairie states. Thus it is that good pine now stands between the cow and the blizzard, just as good oak stands between the blizzard and me. Rest, cries the chief sawyer, and we pause for breath. Now our saw bites into the 1880s, into 1889, a drought year in which Arbor Day was first proclaimed, into 1887, when Wisconsin appointed its first game wardens. It was likewise in 1881 that the Wisconsin Agricultural Society debated the question, how do you account for the second growth of black oak timber that has sprung up all over the country in the last 30 years? My oak was one of these. One debater claimed spontaneous generation. Another claimed regurgitation of acorns by southbound pigeons. Why, you suggesting that oak trees are spontaneously generating? The acorn could be regurgitated by the pigeons. Now our saw bites the 1870s, the decade of Wisconsin's carousal in wheat. Monday morning came in 1879 when chinch bugs, grubs, rust, and soil exhaustion finally convinced Wisconsin farmers that they could not compete with the virgin prairies further west in the game of weeding land to death. I suspect that this farm played its share in the game, and that the sand blow just north of my oak had its origins in overweeding. In 1878, a deer hunter from Sauk Rapids remarked prophetically, "The hunters promised to outnumber the deer." 10 September 1877, two brothers, shooting Muskego Lake, bagged 210 blue-winged teal in one day. In 1874, the first factory-made barbed wire was stapled to oak trees. I hope no such artifacts are buried in the oak now under saw. In 1872, the last wild Wisconsin turkey was killed 2 counties to the southwest. It is appropriate that the decade ending the pioneer carousal in wheat should likewise have ended the pioneer carousal in pigeon blood. In 1871, within a 50-mile triangle spreading northwestward from my oak, 136 million pigeons are estimated to have nested, and some may have nested in it, for it was then a thrifty sapling 20 feet tall. Pigeon hunters by scores plied their trade with net and gun, club and salt lick, and trainloads of prospective pigeon pie moved southward and eastward toward the city. It was the last big nesting in Wisconsin, and nearly the last in any state. The same year, 1871, brought other evidence of the march of empire. The Peshtigo Fire, which cleared a couple of counties of trees and soil, and the Chicago Fire, said to have started from the protesting kick of a cow. It was likewise in 1870 that a market gunner boasted in the American Sportsman of killing 6,000 ducks in one season near Chicago. Our saw now cuts the 1860s, when thousands died to settle the question, is the man-man community likely to be dismembered? They settled it, but they did not see, nor do we yet see, that the same question applies to the man-land community. This decade was not without its gropings toward the larger issue. In 1867, Increase A. Lapham induced the State Horticultural Society to offer prizes for forest plantations. In 1866, the last native Wisconsin elk was killed. The saw now serves 1865, the pith year of our oak. In that year, John Muir offered to buy from his brother, who then owned the home farm 30 miles east of my oak, a sanctuary for the wildflowers that had gladdened his youth. His brother declined to part with the land, but he could not suppress the idea. 1865 still stands in Wisconsin history as the birth year of mercy for things natural, wild, and free. We have cut the core. Our saw now reverses its orientation in history. We cut backward across the years, and outward toward the far side of the stump. At last there's a tremor in the great trunk. The saw kerf suddenly widens. The saw is quickly pulled as the sawyers spring backward to safety. All hands cry, "Timber!" My oak leans, groans, and crashes with earth-shattering thunder, to lie prostrate across the emigrant road that gave it birth. That's the essay Good Oak. Interestingly enough, when I was releasing my first EP, go check it out on Spotify, I needed to come up with like a name for the label, basically, like the record label. I'm just releasing, by myself, so I just chose Good Oak because I was reading this essay at that time. I don't even remember why, but I liked the sound of Good Oak. It felt apropos with my love for nature, and some of the concepts of the songs were to do with environmentalism a little bit, so it made sense to me at the time. I have some problems with this essay at the same time as I think there's a lot of truth as well. The two spiritual dangers, supposing that food comes from the grocer and supposing that heat comes from the furnace, those are pretty poignant points, I would say. Not being aware or thinking about where our sources of food come from, what sort of labor is required for that, what are the environmental impacts of agricultural and meat processes. Like, the meat industry is super wasteful, has a ton of water and land usage that is completely unsustainable, and farming practices, given the subsidies that we've given out to large corporations, industrial farming is also a pretty big issue at this point. Totally understand where he's coming from with that, and with heat coming from the furnace, I mean, especially at the time this was written, energy was not clean, and still today we have a lot to improve on in that way. A lot of furnaces, are being powered by natural gas, and that is cleaner than coal and other forms of fossil fuel, but it's not really clean. So we definitely have some ways to go in terms of sustainability in those two respects. And also the spiritual danger of assuming these things are for us, that they are granted, God-given, what have you, to not, at least occasionally, think about where these things are coming from and try to, where you can, just be mindful of the systems and processes that afford you food and heat. I think that concept that goes throughout this essay of sort of like the labor that's involved and the energy that is expended, I think that's something good to keep in mind. I think in general, the way that he lays out the history of both Wisconsin and just our country through the lens of ecological events, the loss of species like the passenger pigeon, just gross overhunting of ducks, of other animals. People were boasting about how many birds they shot in one summer. All these different like checkpoints where different legislature was passed that either hindered or helped in the fight for conservation. I think that's really interesting. I don't really like how we talked about the Civil War. Is the man-man community likely to be dismembered? They settled it, but they did not see, nor do we yet see, that the same question applies to the man-land community. This, to me, is oversimplifying the first question he brought up, because he said that they settled it. They clearly did not. At the time that he wrote these essays, it was fully after the Reconstruction period where the advancements that formerly enslaved black people were starting to make had instantly been reversed. The question of whether our country would stay one country or two, that question was settled. But the man community was for sure not unified. It was extremely divided. To say that that question was settled is an extremely privileged take. And to sort of insinuate that the question of will the man-land community stay unified or will be dismembered, saying that's the larger question of the two, is really frustrating for me as well, because if we're not unified as people, we will not be unified with the land. When you have a system that prioritizes one race of people over the other, those hierarchies continue to go. When we treat black people as a subclass of humanity, there is no chance in hell that we will treat animals and trees and water with a modicum of respect unless it impacts white folk. And we've seen that in today's environmentalism. We've seen how pipelines, like the Dakota pipeline, like Line 5 and Line 4, Line 3, they're routinely placed in places that will affect indigenous populations. And the protestations of people both living on that land and from other parts of the country that have come together in unity, they are met with oppressive force to try to quell their disruption of the status quo. It is extremely short-sighted to see the question of man, land, and man as two separate questions. If the human race is to survive, if the natural world is to prosper and start to come back from some of the damage that we've done, we have to stand together. So it's extremely disappointing to me that he said the first question is answered, settled, and the second question is the larger of the two questions. I would say that it's the same question. Also, he mentioned the two spiritual dangers of like the modern life and only really talked about one. I mean, that's the whole point of the essay was about the good oak. But I do wonder if the first spiritual danger will come up again later, or if it was just sort of like a remark he made in passing. I don't remember it being brought up again, so that's a little bit odd to me personally. I think that might cover everything I wanted to talk about. Well, I hope this video is coherent. I got sick right before I started making it, and I didn't realize I was sick until I started reading Good Oak. That's when it really kind of set in for me. But yeah, hopefully, even though I'm not feeling the greatest, hopefully I was still able to make my points and I didn't forget any, because I feel like I've forgotten some. Take care of yourself, take care of each other. Have a good one. Bye-bye.